Hey there, everyone. Welcome to the optional instructional Zoom. Today, we are going to talk about Pearl Harbor as a part of the standard involving the American entry into World War II. And so we, had some lessons. We've had a little bit of notes about this, but it kind of goes a lot deeper and it goes back farther than most people understand. So even though the attack on Pearl Harbor itself was a shock to most people, there would have been people who kind of would have known something was coming, not really understanding that what the drastic nature of what happened, or understanding really that it was going to happen in Hawaii. Although we'll see a few reasons as why we probably should have figured some of that, but for the most part, we're going to check out some cool stuff, some maps. I love to deal with maps, especially when we're talking about history, especially when we're talking about war. Now, I'm not one of those war historians that constantly likes to talk about war, but when we are going to talk about war, because it's part of what we need to talk about, I do like to use maps so we can see where things are happening, and hopefully that can help us to understand why things are happening sometimes. So we are going to look at some stuff. It's going to be a good time. All right, so here we are, right? This is our standard that we're checking out today. What your expectation for your learning can be. We're going to talk about Pearl Harbor. We're going to talk about, the background, why Pearl Harbor happened, what happened with Pearl Harbor, and obviously, inevitably, this is why one of the major reasons that the United States did enter the war after trying to remain neutral for so long. But that is what we're going to check out today for sure. So like I said, we are going to look at some maps. We're going to look at some activity that I like. We're going to look at some GIS, some ArcGIS. It's a site that does some cool stuff with maps and manipulating maps, not really manipulating, but showing information on maps to help us kind of to understand our learning. But before we get to that, so let's talk a little bit about the background. Okay, so the background is not only, World War II is happening, right? Obviously, you have this group of people that would like to enhance their territory via warfare. And, we know Germany is a significant part, and Italy is a significant part, but let's talk about Japan. So Japan is an island, obviously. And let's look at this while we talk here. So Japan, you have Japan, and it's not a grand island. It's not huge. There's not a massive population at this time, in the late 30s and early 40s. And when we talked about industrialization, we talked about a lot of raw materials that being necessary for what you're doing as far as industrializing a nation and being able to continue to produce what you need to produce to continue to grow that industrialized nation. Okay, so Japan doesn't have as much of that raw materials as they would like in order to make the changes and growth that they need or that they want. And so they're going to go into Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia, and they're going to take by force territories in order to gain those raw materials. So now the coast of China here is rich with raw materials. And then you have Southeast China, also referred to as Indochina. These are French colonies, Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, right? Then you also have the Dutch East Indies, obviously Dutch. And then you have Burma, Malaya. That's this area over here. That is this area. Those are British. And then, of course, at this time, as you know, the Philippines are controlled by the U.S. And so as Japan is attacking these areas, they're also basically attacking colonies of these European nations that are already in battle, except for, of course, the Philippines and the United States territories, and the United States is not in the fight yet. And so obviously this is not good for relationships, but as it's known that as they tiptoe into U.S. territory here, that it's bad for relations, and they are getting a significant amount of raw materials and especially oil, gasoline from the United States, and made possible by the United States. And so with this huge aggression, horrifying things that the Japanese do to the other Asian peoples during this time, often compared to what the Nazis did, often referred to as a Holocaust of its own, as they murdered so many people during this time. And so obviously the United States is like, so there's diplomacy, but diplomacy does not, diplomacy only works if a country is willing to stop attacking other countries, right? So there's no bargaining with a country who's trying to take over part of the world, only to feed their need for power and industrialization. And so obviously those kind of talks break down, and then you have the embargo, right? And this is the source, the most immediate source, right? We're talking long-term reasons before, when we're talking about what Japan is doing and the fact that other European nations and the United States are not happy about it. But we're going to talk about a more immediate cause with this embargo, because you can't wage war without oil. And so as the US tries to cut off the oil supplies of Japan, that is when Japan makes the decision to have this come into play. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening here and the strategic nature of what we're having, because the US fleet was originally not stationed in Pearl Harbor. It was, on the coast. And so let's look at just some numbers. Let's do some numbers. So we're gonna look at some distances here, right? Okay, so we're talking Japan. And note the curvature, right? Because we're measuring across what is actually a sphere, and this is a flat representation. So so Japan to Hawaii is roughly, depending on where you're going, and we're going to Oahu, that's the island we'll be talking about. It's a little under 4,000 miles. Okay, depending on how you get there, right? Now, to actually attack the United States mainland, even the mainland, even though Hawaii is obviously a part of the United States, is a significantly large venture, another 2,000 miles, right? And so thinking about that, just Hawaii alone, think about this distance. If we're going to go to LA, it's 2,500 miles. So we're talking these grand distances away from these mainland territories. And Hawaii is not really in the middle, but it is in an area that is strategic in nature, of course, when you're talking about dealing with Japan. And so that is why when the decision was made for the embargo, of course, Roosevelt is going to send the fleet to Hawaii, because if something's coming from Japan, it's obviously coming via this way. And if you look at all the things that we're going to look at on the island, it is, strategically, the island is good. There's a lot of military presence on the island. And so yeah. So before we get to that, though, let's look at the nature of what Japan is doing here. So we're going to turn on the Japanese occupation. So this island, Japan, has essentially taken over the bulk of Southeast Asia. Not really all of Southeast Asia, and they are moving into mainland China. Now, China has the ability, because it is so large at the time, they have the ability to continue to move their population, their capital, their important people, even though, of course, all people are important, but according to the government is important, right? So they're moving their officials deeper and deeper inland, even though they have less and less materials here. Like, this is the business end of China, really. This is where you're shipping your raw materials, your manufacturing. It's mostly happening here. And as you go inland, it is less and less conducive to really anything profitable. And so they're still able to push in there, but it's getting close, right? And once again, the countries of Europe that have colonized these areas are less than thrilled about the Japanese aggression there, right? So we've talked about the distances. We've seen clearly what Japan is doing by nature. So let's take a look at, not that button, right? There's the button. Now we're cooking with gas. So we're going to go check out Oahu, right? So this is the island of Oahu. And let's look at the military installations, right? So you have the presence of all four branches, most significantly on the perimeter, right? The Army is also, they do have an airfield and a barracks inside in the land here, but a significant amount here is going to be on the perimeter, which makes sense. If you're going to protect an island, You're going to be on the perimeter if you want to notice things. And if you're, that's right, using ships, right? We're looking at the Navy, the Marines here. Yes, you do have an Air Force presence here, but most of all, you're going to be hopping on ships. And so, yeah, you're going to be on the perimeter of the island. And then here you have, these are radar stations. Obviously, now Hawaii, during this time, the military is using mobile radar, but yet here you are still on the perimeter so that you can obviously see what's going on out there. And so that's the military presence there, significant military presence. Obviously, this is Pearl Harbor. This is where the bulk of the fleet is, and we'll take a closer look at that later as another part of this lesson, but that's where the bulk of your fleet is. Okay, you have a significant military presence, right? You have the bulk of the fleet there right now. So if you're going to attack Pearl Harbor, let's go out again. Now, so here's Japan, right? If you're coming into Pearl Harbor, it's really, the expectation would really be, in my mind, northwest, right? It's coming from the northwest. And we'll see a little bit later that the Japanese don't attack directly there, even though, the U.S. still should have easily been able to detect this attack, because you've got a northern station, you've got a northwestern station, and you have a western radar station. You have plenty of radar stations that should indeed be able to detect these attacks as they come, and we'll see why that was also a slight debacle as well. So we're going to look at this in a different way, more in footage from the time period in a minute, but let's check out. So this is your attack, right? So your attack comes directly from the north, which is it catches us off guard here, because it's directly from the north. When Japan is really over here, the expectation would not be that they would go basically almost past Hawaii, Oahu, and then come straight down to attack this island. But that's exactly what they do. And you see that the first wave of attacks, you're hitting the airfield. You're hitting another airfield, right? So they're hitting a majority of the airfields, and you're hitting, obviously, as you can see, the culmination of these attacks is directed mostly at Pearl Harbor, where the U.S. fleet is. And so you're going to, obviously, you want to hit the fleet, because you got aircraft carriers, you've got destroyers, you've got a significant amount of defense there, but at the same time you have these airfields. You don't want your enemy to be able to launch planes. And so that is the bulk of the ideology here, is to strike fast, strike obviously at a surprise, but to get the airfields and to get the shipyards. So this is the first wave coming directly from the north. And after everything's already in chaos, then here you have the second wave that still targets the airfields, but from a completely different angle. So if you see this attack and you're looking at this direction for the attack to continue, they once again trying to surprise, coming at it from a different angle. And so that's basically the short version of this attack, and the kind of the idea behind how to use this attack to get that surprise and to accomplish what they want to accomplish. They want to destroy the U.S. fleet, because the U.S. fleet is going to be, obviously, here we go, thinking about it, right? Hawaii's over here. If the U.S. fleet's here, Japan made it all the way here to attack Pearl Harbor. Obviously, the idea would be that the U.S. could make it all the way there to attack Japan. Of course, they see later in the war that the U.S. is, if they want to get you, they're going to get you. But let's look at, just really quickly before we move on, let's check out what happens after Pearl Harbor. So once again, for those in the cheap seats, here's Hawaii, here's Japan. Now after, so that's what happens post Pearl Harbor attack, right? So here, so these are obviously islands and territories that the U.S. is going to bomb, right? They're obviously trying to take back territory that Japan has had. You check out, we can also overlay the Japanese occupation. So we're pushing in, those red islands are occupied, pushing in to take back territory. And then the final, if you didn't notice there at the end, watching right here, you'll see that that atomic bomb that is dropped. Well, both of them. So you'll see the attacks as we push in. And boom, there you go. There's the two bombs. So if the goal of the Japanese was to prevent the U.S. from attacking, to prevent, I mean, I don't know if they wanted to prevent them from entering the war. I don't. That doesn't seem likely, but maybe to hinder, obviously, an offensive. And they did sink a ton of ships and disabled several ships, lots of damage. But obviously, the U.S. repaired those ships and was completely able to attack and eventually drop those bombs and end the war with Japan in the Pacific theater. But so if the goal was to keep America out of the war, obviously, not only did it not keep America out of the war, but it completely backfired as America did drop those bombs and end the war, right? So now, after just talking about that a little bit, let's check out a little something else. This is a great little website I found because that's what history nerds do. We search the internet and find stuff. So let's check this out. We're gonna, like I said, we're gonna look at some footage. And one of my, as we progress in history, getting to the point where you have like real footage. So check this out, right? So this is a great little website I found, right? So, and this is, obviously that is Japanese fleet. And this is video, obviously taken by the Japanese of their, memorializing and kind of taking note of this attack, obviously thinking that the end result several years later was going to be very different than it ends up being for them. So obviously, infamous day, a day that will live in infamy, FDR's speech that we have read. This is obviously playing on that, right? So, we're talking about what's going to be the loss of 2,400 lives with many, many more injured, right? Pretty destructive, pretty hardcore. And once again, still it didn't even work, right? In fact, it had the opposite effect of what the Japanese wanted. Okay, so a little what we talked about before, right there, you've got the tensions, you got the embargo, right? Roosevelt was a Pacific Fleet. You've got this embargo on oil and raw materials, which is going to crush, if this stands, it's going to crush Japan and any attempts they have to continue and really maintain the territories that they have that they've taken. So here is what this is the route or route, depending on that the Japanese fleet takes in order to get to their attack position, right? So in November 26th, right, 6 aircraft carriers, 355 planes, it's a lot, 2 battleships, 3 cruisers, and 9 destroyers, also 5 midget submarines, right, leave and head towards their attack. So they're maintaining a route that avoids traditional shipping lanes, right? Because they're obviously trying to avoid detection. Their goal is surprise. And so you see that they go straight across and then a little bit over, and then they set up shop here north of the Hawaiian Islands, right? 10 days it takes them to get there, right? And so they're up here 230 miles north of Oahu as they prepare for this these 2 attack waves. And you can see, you got the planes, you've got another aircraft carrier in the distance. If we're going to talk about war, we're going to talk about things that happen. I love to have pictures and especially love to have video. And I gotta be honest with you, as a historian, I think that the black and white from this time period is really gritty and really it kind of affects me more, I mean, as later on you get colorized, it's almost like as a person in the modern era, you look at this colorized thing and you're like, oh, you almost compare it more to like modern film, whereas here it's like, this is old, it's gritty, it's what really happened. It's kind of, it's just dirty, it's something that happened. It's great, right? So here's what I alluded to before, right? So there's a minesweeper. So obviously they're going to patrol Pearl Harbor. And so minesweeper was patrolling near the entrance of the harbor. And they spotted something, a periscope in the water, right? And so they're like, hey, there's a sub in Pearl Harbor, which should have, in my mind, that should have set off tons of alarms. And so, they dropped death charges, they fired on the sub, right? But, still, I think that would have been like a serious warning at the time. There's a destroyer there, right? Okay, so this is upon our radar stations in the north part of the island, right? So to junior operators, they see more than 50 approaching aircraft, right? So that's like, boom, alarms are going off, right? There's no reason for 50 aircraft to be approaching, right? And so they report it very quickly to Fort Shafter on the south end of the island. So they're not getting the same data. They're not seeing the same thing. And so this lieutenant at the fort thinks, oh, that must be this bunch of bombers that's heading out to Hawaii from California. So they kind of dismissed this report. But, if they're heading from California to Hawaii, they would have been in a different spot. So this is a miscalculation. This is an error that really costs a lot of lives, because at this point, if they had scrambled aircraft, not only would the aircraft that were destroyed on the ground, which were plentiful, wouldn't have happened, but at the same time, the massive loss of life, all because so we don't give his name because that would be pretty cold-hearted. But what a boo-boo, if you're gonna make a boo-boo, what a boo-boo. Anyway, so then we saw that first wave, right? You saw the first wave as it came about. So you have 49 high altitude bombers. You have the 51 dive bombers, which is what a lot of the fighters and the dive bombers crashing into ships. I think that's what a lot of people remember from this, with the kamikaze fighters who, basically when they take off, they know that they're not coming back, right? So you have these bombers. So basically you've got a total of 100 bombers, 40 torpedo bombers, so basically 140 bombers, and then 43 fighters. And so here they are. Obviously, this is a Japanese ship. They're on the deck, and they're bidding their fighters adieu. Here's bomber taking off from the deck of an aircraft carrier, right, on their way with that first wave that we saw, right? And so they get there, they realize, as they're monitoring the radio, they realize that they really have caught the Americans off guard. It really is going to be a surprise attack. And so you get the signal, Tora, 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 which should be infamous. There's a movie about this. It's called Tora, 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 right? And Tora in Japanese means tiger. But this was a signal that surprised that they had achieved the element of surprise and that the attack should go. And then here you see footage of these planes coming in. And so, yeah, once again, here's so they're attacking Wheeler Airfield because he wants, immediately to destroy as many planes on the ground as you can. So they bomb Wheeler Airfield. And this is obviously an aerial photograph of basically what equates to a destroyed airfield. And every plane, or almost every plane on there, destroyed. And if not, the landing strips are destroyed. The runways are destroyed, so nobody's taking off either. And you see this over here, it's just crumbled up messes of planes. So, although, like I said, the attack was successful, the end goal was definitely not achieved. Here we go, heading over to the Naval Air Station, right? 6 Japanese warbirds moving here, want to attack seaplane base, right? Destroying all but 6 of the aircraft on the ground. Here you see, as it says, this picture is them trying to salvage planes that were not completely destroyed. Once again, they're seaplanes. As you can see, it's in the ocean. And then you have this massive attack, attacking another air station, right? Naval Air Station. Just basically attacking all of these specific bases in order to try and keep any aircraft from taking off, right? And so basically destroys all these aircraft because they're parked right next to each other. Almost everything's completely destroyed. And here, air raid on Pearl Harbor. All right, so now we can see a little bit more. So here is, obviously how the ships were lined up. So basically, they're just right next to each other and right in bunches for the most part. And so you have this easy target. So from above here, we'll go through. All right, so West Virginia struck by up to 9 torpedoes. So it's not having a good day. 2 bombs, the rudder, the hull is damaged, right? It doesn't capsize, but it's completely immobilized. It's not doing anything. And then you see, I can't even imagine trying to see or work or do anything on that. That smoke is ridiculously thick. 2 torpedoes strike to California. Bomb hits the deck, begins to flood, and then you get an oil slick as the oil and gasoline starts to leak out of the ship. 102 men died just on the California alone. All right, the Oklahoma, 9 torpedoes. Within 20 minutes, it's almost completely capsized. And this is one of those ships that has crew members trapped inside, some of them with oxygen pockets. And so they survived for a while. And then obviously, most of them did not make it out eventually. So like I said, over the next 2 days, so you have those oxygen pockets as it's capsizing and sinking, right? 32 sailors have been trapped inside, they get saved, but 429 completely perish. Now the Arizona, high altitude bombers throughout the first wave of attacks. Like I said, yeah, and this, unfortunately, we're getting. So this, so it ignites all of the gunpowder on this ship. And some of these ships were completely refueled as recently as the previous day. And so not only do you have, they're obviously loaded with ammunition, which here you can see blowing up, but they're also loaded with fuel, which is gonna, you get these kinds of fires. So almost 1,200 men on that ship alone. Yeah, the Arizona had just been filled 1.5 million gallons of fuel. So, and you're going to see a video here, not a video, this picture. So this is 3 days later, you're still seeing oil and fuel leaking from the ship, and it's still leaking oil to this day. All right, so the USS Helm was actually mobile when the attack began. So it was trying to get out of the harbor, and it did destroy one of these Japanese subs. Like I said, there were 5 midget subs in there to help support and be just as secretive during the attack. So the Nevada, although damaged in the beginning, right, it kind of gets underway trying to get out of the harbor, but it's not going to make it. So they ground themselves here in order to not block the harbor. And then you have the second wave of attacks, right? That had similar targets, right? 35 fighters, 78 dive bombers, and 54 high altitude bombers start out at 9 a.m. So not long after the first attack. But the U.S. is able to make some anti-aircraft fire defense. Then you have also attacking ships that are in dry dock. Okay, so being repaired, painted, whatever. So they attack ships that are in dry dock as well. They're literally trying to destroy the entire fleet. And these are ships in dry dock once again. There's the USS Shaw, and you'll see, I believe there's a picture. Yeah, the USS Shaw, the entire front end is just blown clean off of that ship. All right, so what are the results here? What's the aftermath? So Japan loses 29 planes. The US loses 169. Japan loses all 5 subs. 19 ships of the fleet are damaged. Japan suffers 129 casualties, the US 2,403. But all of the ships were eventually salvaged and repaired, except the Arizona, which was said is still on the bottom there leaking. So 2,400 lives claimed, still 1,178 wounded. And the next day you get FDR in front of Congress, making the day that will live in infamy speech, requesting a declaration of war, which obviously we get. And then, we looked at what happens next. Roosevelt signed the declaration. And so it's a significant, so Pearl Harbor is extremely significant in the minds of many historians, but it should be significant still in the minds of, everyone thinking that, if you're in an isolated area, that nothing is ever going to happen. As we progress with, more significant technology and warfare, these things obviously can happen. And so not obviously meaning to scare anybody, but it's good to know that America is at the ready. It's good to know that that we know that we study these things, even though we've had attacks since then on American soil that were also surprises, even though in a similar fashion, people had tried to warn, but it's not, it's just not always something that you can stop. Anywho, so that is, like I said, that is a great representation in 2 different methods here of what we're looking at here, right? Why did the U.S. enter the war? Well, Pearl Harbor is probably the most significant event that had the American side join World War II. And that is, it's a good rundown of kind of what you're looking at, a little bit of the long-term causes, definitely the short, immediate causes of that, and then the effects. And then, as you see, like I said, it didn't, Japan didn't achieve their aim. They actually far from it, the other way for sure. So hopefully this has given you an idea, a little bit more significant idea of the geography involved, and maybe, how things played out a little bit better in your mind, as you can see, and then seeing, some of those pictures and video clips of the actual time when this stuff happened, just kind of a little more succinct in your mind and kind of internalization of this. And then you have test, right? You have your test today. So generally at this point, obviously I would ask if there's any questions that anyone had that we could run over. I can clear it for anybody, but yeah. So if you watch this and you have questions, please feel free to shoot me an email or a Schoology message and whatnot, and I'll be more than happy to clear anything up for you. Hope everyone enjoyed today's lesson, and hope some of you come to the next lesson. Hope everyone has a great week.